One thing that cropped up in a recent Reels run, or read recently anyway, was someone basing general intelligence on things that we take for granted in this modern day. He uses the example of computer technology, the understanding of physics such as the solar system and gravity, chemistry, that being the periodic elements, material properties and molecular metallurgy, and biology, that being Darwin and evolution, germ theory and virology. These days we think anyone that can't read, turn on a phone or take a picture is old and stupid. I mean, my grandpa doesn't have a phone like this at all, but he doesn't need one, to be honest. That's all my point. As people have pointed out, it's throughout generational bashing forums, some manuals that have included some pretty obvious things for the old generation nowadays includes instructions that probably don't need to be on there. For example, when it comes to antifreeze, it now says don't drink it. That's something pretty obvious for the old generation. But these days, no. It's this kind of modern intellectual elitism that is rife in the denouncer communities that say God is merely filling in the gaps. Someone did a video on this that I'm going to delve into when I get the chance, but generally they say we've advanced to the point where we don't need a God, even if one exists. However, there are plenty of examples of human beings being far busier than their modern counterparts, and thus potentially having less time for God, but also having things that we struggle to understand, to use, let alone how they were made in the first place. Going back in time, we can see modern people struggling to understand how to use a map and compass, something I learned very quickly at school. Or even using a sextant for any form of navigation. I myself use landmarks to navigate and try to avoid using a sat-nav if at all possible. In fact, even putting the sat-nav aside when I know the route. There are plenty of forums online where people talk about how they would struggle in the apocalypse, whether they would find the pharmaceuticals they need. When I simply say that understanding botany and herbology can answer the majority of maladies. Many people will be seeking medication for. For example, inflammation, that can be sorted with ginger, for example. Pain relief, that can quite simply be willow bark. Antihistamines, easy enough. Bit of nettle will do that nicely. And, of course, antiseptics. And those are just to name a few. A classic example I can think of is the creation of fire and the crafting of tools using natural materials, including wood, animal bones, horns, and of course, stone. These are things that we have left behind because we don't think we need them anymore. When in fact, the people back then knew to do it and they were just as sharp as you and me. Whilst it's true in science that what we understand today might be overruled by the discoveries of tomorrow, that does not lead to the knowledge of the past being irrelevant today. The classic example in science is Newton's laws of motion and gravity, coming up against Einstein's theories of relativity. True Newtonian physics couldn't explain the unusual orbits of Mercury, which Einstein's theory of relativity solved without too much issue. This doesn't, however, disprove Newton's perfectly workable laws of gravitation and motion, but merely explains how it can be applied to items of considerably greater mass. It's worthwhile noting that the scientists didn't try coming up with a new theory first of all, because they had a working theory that there was another planet closer to the Sun than Mercury, giving it the speculative name of Vulcan. This was on the back of already having found Neptune due to the unusual orbital period of Uranus. This resulted in them originally thinking, oh, there's something wrong with Newtonian physics. Then one person said, why didn't he look for another planet? And hey presto, there was the other planet, that being Neptune. It was a tried and tested method that had worked before, even when people doubted it. It's this level of doubt and confusion my study of experimental theology is geared to avoiding if possible. The odds are I will fail in this endeavour, no doubt. It's just the way things are. For that, I always recommend that we play devil's advocate. That's a core tenet of all experimental theology. The tricky thing is, how can you apply this when actively searching for a creative way to look at a problem? Fortunately, there are some ways that this can be done, and it has been done. When you can introduce something interesting and fun that might have been used in history, but clearly wasn't. Either that they weren't ever shown, or even if they were shown to be effective, but just don't fit the historical setting, or for some reason just don't make sense with the technology at hand, even if it was perfectly possible with the technology. To demonstrate that principle, I'm here in my garage again with a selection of weapons to demonstrate what things could potentially have been in history, but aren't necessarily. So, just because I like things and would think they could be used in history, doesn't mean they are. One example of that would have to be the hockey stick. I'm pretty sure some people might think, nah, it's just something fun to wave around. I look at this and think, could it be used as a weapon? I think it could. Let's say it's made of metal. Let's say this bit is a sharpened blade, this bit is maybe a bit more jagged, and this bit is just not a spike, it's a hook. Now it becomes essentially like a Dothraki arrow. You can use this end to chop at people with a sword. You can use that to really keep people at bay. This side can be used to defend, to block incoming attacks. Then this becomes something that catches a weapon and can be used to disarm them. Or even, if they got particularly stuck, or if you want, this then can be used to hook over a shield. Hook it over, pull down. If it's got a spike, that can be used as a spike. Or if this can be spiked as well, you can use that to properly crack into an opponent's armour. And just with the weight as it is, the way it's balanced, this is a fairly decent weapon. But would it have been used in history? Would something like this actually be a weapon? Simple fact is, no. Because this would be more like a falchion, and there have been falchions throughout history. If you want something that has a spike on it, go for an axe, a hammer, anything like that. There are plenty of those in history. There's no need to make a completely different weapon when you know one already works. I can imagine someone tried making something like this. I'm pretty sure there are examples of similar things throughout the world. I'm focusing mainly on medieval history in Europe, but there are weapons like the dao and many other swords like this throughout other cultures. I can't think of the names right now, but if you watch Forged in Fire, one of them is bound to crop up. That looks broadly similar to this, though not used in the same way. More often it's just a very curved blade, sometimes with a knob here to stop the cut going too far. This is one of the examples I could find, this being the Egyptian khopesh. It's basically an axe blade on a handle that we use like a sword. You can use it to hook weapons aside, hook shields aside, and attack with the cutting edge, and also thrust with. I don't have anything like that in my armoury, so that's near enough to ones I can get. And in fact, it's not too dissimilar to my hockey stick, or at least the way I think it would have been used in the past. So it's very much a weapon that the design of is mirrored in history, but it's not a weapon that could be used. So not as it is. So the medieval hockey stick isn't a viable weapon. Now, in my last warrior video, I demonstrated this being my riot stick, and I demonstrated it firstly as my longsword training, using it for cuts, for thrusts, and for rapier stuff. But when I was just feeling it like this, using this bit of grip, which you can use for half swording, I thought, this end's fairly heavy. It's a bit rattly, annoyingly, I need to sort it out. But that could be like a mace. If I make it bigger, then it'll be a proper striking mace. Now, Scalagrim did a great video on two-handed maces, so I recommend checking out that video. So I can leave a link in the description. I can do that with these long ones. That will tell you that whilst two-handed maces weren't a thing as and of themselves, they were generally seen as spiked pole arms. If I had to think of a two-handed mace that was used in pop culture, strangely enough, it would actually be in the BBC adaptation of Robin Hood. I don't know the name of the actor who did Robin Hood, but it was when they... I don't remember I think the name of the episode was Treasure of a Nation. For Zor Patriae, yeah. Where they met a member of King Richard's royal guard, personal guard. He was a towering man, taller than Little John, and he carried a mace, essentially a mace head on a staff, about as tall as he was, and he used it in a wide, overhead swing motion like this. Something I can't demonstrate anywhere else except in here. And that was a devastating weapon. I have a feeling they thought, let's make it a flail, but then they thought, hang on, the flail bit could come off, so just put a big knobby bit on the end. He only ever used it like that, and occasionally used the butt end like a staff to thrust. Now, this could be a viable weapon. I'm sort of thinking, with a little toasting fork here, want to have a spike or a blade on the end, and use that as the primary. The swing around like this is all very well and good for personal use, but it's very much a, as I said in my last video, a zone 4 or 5, yeah, a zone 4 or 3 type of weapon, keeping people at a distance. But the moment people come in, this just basically becomes a big stick. But unfortunately, things like this do exist in history. Pole axes and warhammers, bec the korban, halberds, bill hooks. There's spikes in the end to keep people at a distance, and a big heavy weight to crush. So, such a weapon did exist in history, but not in the way we expected. So these weapons existing in history, already in some form, might seem disheartening. However, I think there is a weapon that could potentially have existed in history, but we just don't really have much evidence for it. Annoyingly, I don't have the finishing piece for it, but I thought, what if you had a staff, like my carrywood staff here, and told you to bring it out at some point, and what if I put a blade on the end, making it into a spear? Well, surely you'd have to either bind so tight it will never come off, or put a nail in, or tie it on with leather or something like that. And that is perfectly possible. But I didn't think of the chance to bring it here. I made a spearhead for this. It would basically come up to about a full hand taller than it, so about my height. That'd be about perfect for a spear, really. And had to do it in two parts because I ended up making the socket a bit too small to go around here sensibly. So I got another piece from an old garden rake. It was a fork, yeah, and made that into the socket. And the main tricky bit was trying to connect the two together, which I'm pretty sure would not have happened in history. They would simply started again. I just didn't want to waste my time digging out another piece of metal to do that. And what I found was, I took a little bit of a leather glove over the staff head to keep it safe, so I wouldn't have to scratch it up and hence have to revarnish it and all that. And I found I put that glove on along with the spade socket. That was incredibly secure. It was actually really difficult to pull off. And that would, well, once I've managed to connect the two pieces, that would make a very effective and very strong spearhead. And I thought, could that be done in history? And before you say that would have come off the things I trusted, I tried, believe me. This is a very light weapon, and I've been able to move it around with some force, even doing cuts with that sort of force, and it stayed on pretty well, not even loosening. Whilst it would have come off eventually in battle, that's just sort of wear and tear, if you will. I'm pretty sure someone would have just seen this is a very thin stick and hit it with an axe. This is a very thin staff from a very good carry tree, but it is still a stick. Hit it hard enough with a great sword, it's going to break. It's nowhere near as flimsy as most spears that Mike Rhodes talks about, but hit it hard enough, it will break eventually. This one especially. Most spears, like my mate Andy's spear, it's much stouter, probably the same length as this without the blade head on. I thought that if I use the spearhead on here, that would be great for if I'm just walking through town. Of course, got my staff. Someone tries to cause me problems. Put on my spearhead, jam it on, nice and secure. Now a severe threat, and they try closing on me. This is very much a Zone 4 weapon with a spearhead. It'll be great to keep them at a distance. You can see I can push through my hands pretty easily. It's knobby, so not the best grip, but that means I can really choke up on it in random places. You see, I've run to strike with. It's manoeuvrable, and even with the head on, it still is fairly nimble in the hands. So I can really keep someone at a distance, and I'm much more of a threat because I've got a blade on the end. But then, what if someone really closes in? Whilst there are techniques in staff fighting to get rid of someone off your stick, they say grab towards the end, it's 12, 12, 12, yank it out, they can stab, that will be effective. And if they grab the middle, then it's all about pivoting and hooking. In this case, they get too close and there's not really much I can do to keep them back, and if say they box me in an alley, then pull the head off, do like a dagger. Doubtful that would happen, to be honest, but if you know what you're doing, you can really rip it off, and hey presto, you got it ready. You may say, what if someone knows it's there and they try pulling it off? Well, here's the thing. I would have to use both hands to pull. So we're pulling with the stick and we're pulling with the shank. So that takes two lots of effort to pull it off. If someone has grabbed the spearhead to the point where they would have enough grip to pull it off, by that point, I'm more focused on controlling the blade. if they try pulling, what I want to do is set myself up so they pull, I can actually let their weight and their pull drag the point into them to make the attack more their problem than my problem. And also there's those staff breaking techniques as well. So whilst the head could be pulled up by someone else, it's going to be a lot of effort, and quite frankly, if you know it's going to happen, you'd be training to ensure that won't happen. There's a lot more things can be done. And you can put it off yourself to have it ready in hand. Now, would it have happened in history? Honestly, I think it might have been. I mean, it's not too dissimilar to a bayonet, in a sense. You've got, as guns would have had, certainly guns these days and back in the time of, well, as far back as Napoleon, I think, Napoleonic Wars, they would have had bayonets, so if your shot's useless, it becomes a thrusting weapon, and you can use it to strike at people as well. It becomes a close quarters weapon. Far less balanced than a proper spear or sword, but it's still effective. So what about putting essentially a removable blade on a spear? Makes little sense. I don't know any sort of faction that would want to do that. Maybe just a palmer or someone who trained in spear fighting, staff fighting, stuff like that. So they make a blade that would just fit on, make them more dangerous. Could happen. And to be honest, if it did happen, how would we know anyway? Because when we see spearheads, it's not often we see the spear sharp. It's very rare, in fact. And more often we'd have to guess at how they were secured. That's where experimental archaeology comes in. Here we got some examples of spearheads that were shown up in the archaeological record, including what looks like a shank spearhead in this picture on the right, and many more socket types. Now, these are fairly easy to tell how they've been fitted, but because the spear shaft is missing, we can't be sure how they would have been fitted. You can see in this one, if I zoom in slightly, you can see what looks like a pinhole, or maybe a pin itself. In this cross section you can see the pin. But since wood and, for that matter, leather are organic materials, they would rot and decay before we ever find them. So there's a strong likelihood that my method with the glove with the strip of leather might actually have been used. There's no evidence to support it, but then again, how will we know? Because the spear shafts show up so rarely in the archaeological record. So if this thing did happen, it would most likely be a crafted thing by an individual, or for an individual purpose, not for the masses, as it were. I'm pretty sure that my idea could have been used in history. Could have, not definite. There are other things that, in history, could have been used in that sort of way. But not all in the way we expect. There are many more famous examples of these things, like Joreg of the Slingshot channel and the instant legolas, which most likely led to the production of the adder bow. Now, Todd Cutler of Todd's Workshop did a video showing not only could the instant legolas be made with medieval materials, but also the adder had a medieval counterpart, that being the latchet crossbow. He even pointed out that the Chinese repeating crossbow was active during that time period, only worlds apart with no known crossover. If they had gone into contact, you never know, they may have created the adder bow 700 years earlier. You honestly never know. Shad and his team from Shadiversity put these sorts of things to test all the time, like the whip, flaming arrows, and most famously, the double-bladed sword, which has sparked controversy on other sword-based content creators. The latter is one which, in fact, could be made, and certainly would have been something that would be great to see and to wield, if not by warriors, then, or an adventurer, or a king, then at least a blacksmith, to show his ability to work with such lengths of metal and make them functional. But it is in fact usable in contact if one had the room to swing it around like a big sharp polearm and not try and use it as a sword. The fact of the matter is, though, is it's not a historical weapon and never has been. Two potential reasons are that it was a polearm not designed to be used like polearms that were commonly made, such as halberds, billhooks, war scythes and the like. And they are pretty impractical to carry anywhere, let alone onto a battlefield situation, without causing harm to someone or exposing the blade to the elements for their entire use beyond the armoury. In short, no matter how feasible some ideas can be, there's often a perfectly good reason why they are not in history. An example in theology, something I found earlier, someone once used a trip to Israel and the Roman washhouse to totally reinterpret the sponge on a stick passage in the Gospels to mean they used it to feed Christ from the night bucket. Not only do none of the texts ever suggest that, but it's also heavily implied to be posca, which is the Roman drink, the drink of the legion, and something they would have kept in a communal jar rather than given out in water skins. This isn't something you would dip a dirty toilet sponge into unless you're going to get thumped by your fellow guardsmen. There are many more reasons why it doesn't work, because, well, the fact that it was mentioned as a jar, and most likely it would have been a bucket, as is suggested in this image here. It would most likely be a big stone or wooden bucket. And also, the stick would have had to have been long enough to reach Christ. And furthermore, why would you put a sponge on a stick when it's already on the stick, assuming it's been used already? This just shows that no matter how clever you think you are by interpreting things, if you look at what happens to be in history and in scripture, you often find the answer is already there. This is one thing we have to remember about the people in those days. They weren't stupid. They knew far more about the stuff we want to talk about online regarding the tools they used every day, saw often, and in some cases got to use them, than we can ever hope to understand, or sometimes even want to understand. I honestly don't think we have any right to say that because we have such vast realms of knowledge at our fingertips on the computer and online, can find answers to questions that would never occurred to people in the Iron Age peasants. We are the more intelligent ones. I don't think we have any reason to think that that is the case. Interestingly enough, the ACA raised that in a recent Reels run that I commented on, where they asked, does God have a foreskin? And one of them mentioned that someone had done research into this and found rabbinical debates about this going back 2,000 years. At least one in the 1st century. So it's a question that's been asked for a very long time. Interestingly enough, this just shows that we have these debates throughout history, hence showing we all have the same thoughts, no matter what. It's proof that ancient man had the same thoughts we did regardless of how intelligent we assume they are. They were far more intelligent than we were, or at the very least, with the same intelligence we were. If we were to be plonked back into the Iron Age, assuming we don't get killed for appearing randomly, wearing outlandish clothes, and can actually understand the locals in any way, we would be seen as the village idiot, because we can't do anything that even a child can do by the age of 8. Here's the thing. Here's an interesting thought experiment. I'm certain that the average Iron Age peasant, just the average man, not even the most zealous man, just the average, just like you and me, would listen to you talking about Bitcoin and bank transfers and have the same mindset as many totally ignorant atheists of our day. And by that I mean people that were never raised in Christianity, never raised in any sort of religion. They just grew up with the knowledge that we have and are just facing their first preacher talking about the mysteries of God and the afterlife. They would literally see you as the one who is ignorant and wasting their time with the ridiculous claims, and showing them the proof of the coding, assuming you even have the ability to show them the codes, and that will make up the bank transfers, the accounts, and the cryptocurrency. And you had to say, to understand it, you had to study coding to make any sense of the systems that make up the structure of our Ethernet. You would sound to them as though you were spouting utter nonsense and basically should not be hanging around. The similarities are striking when you get right down to it, and the pitfalls are there for all of us to see. I'm still going to explain a bit more thoroughly before I move on, but essentially, if you go to someone who has no knowledge of computers, no knowledge of coding, show them Bitcoin, show them bank transfers, show them bank accounts, and say the only way you can understand the exact processes is by going through years of study of the data and so forth, the study of economics, the study of computer coding, and more importantly to have one of these devices, one of these, yes, very flashy, yes, not much good for anything else other than for that. You would be looked at like a complete moron, or as any day-to-day atheist would look at a preacher they've never heard of spouting a religion that they have no knowledge of at all. I'm pretty sure you'll be able to see the similarities here. To summarise, the half-life of facts doesn't totally exclude all of past knowledge. Our explorations of history and theology can often be answered by understanding the times they live in and how they would have operated. And just because we seemingly have superior technology and understanding of how the world works, we can present just as ludicrous an idea as total truth as any pious Iron Age peasant, and only be able to present the same sort of evidence as they can for the existence of God. It's these sort of things, being able to see the flaws in these positions and explain them to yourself, that is playing devil's advocate and makes your thoughts, your understanding, far deeper, especially into the subject that you're studying. Never assume that you are apparently in a superior position on the subject, or that it will get you victory every single time. So stay curious, stay critical, stay humble, and God be with you, my friends.